I'm never quite sure what to do when it comes to works like these. Usually, when I'm asked to ruminate upon a work, it's something that's story-centric or story-heavy. RPGs being one of the bigger ones, but I mean, it's not exclusive to RPGs. I mean, I had plenty to talk about in Alien Isolation, didn't I? And its presentation was a lot to discuss there. I had a lot to talk about Bioshock. I don't even like Bioshock. So, there's plenty of ways to pull something from it, but I'm reminded of when I was asked to ruminate on Doom. This would have been about a year and a half ago at this point, I think. A year and a half ago or a year ago, something like that. It's been a little bit, and over a year at the very earliest. And I started at like I don't know what to talk about. I ended up just talking about Doom's contribution and whatnot because I always want to have something to talk about as long as I at least feel like there is something to talk about. And I got to be completely honest. When I first looked at Ratchet and Clank, my first thought was I have no idea what to say about this game. Now the good news is when I went through it, I did have a few things that really popped to mind. I have a full page of notes here. This is probably going to be a little bit of a shorty, though, because most of my notes are fairly simplistic when you get down to it. But my point is, I I'm not complaining, of course. I mean, I love my job, but it's always just weird. It's like someone walking up to me and saying, "What are your in-depth thoughts on Pong?" And I mean, I can joke about that. I can make up stuff. But if you really want me to give a dissertation on Pong, the best I'm going to be able to give you is the insight into programming and how it developed at the time Pong was made. That's about all I got. And I don't even know that off the top of my head. I'm going to have to go look that up. It probably also doesn't help that I'm not super familiar with the Ratchet and Clank series. I mean, I am aware of it. I do know a few things, Emperor Tachyon, Doctor Nefarious, a few other similar things. I am aware of it. And of course, I've seen a little bit of the new game. Only a little bit because I don't own a PS4, but when I was at a friend's house, he actually had one, and I was able to play it a bit, and it was kind of awesome. And I got to be honest, the new Ratchet and Clank is actually the single biggest reason that would convince me to buy a PS4. Yes, really. Even more than FF15 or a potential new Kingdom Hearts game. It was good, is what I'm trying to say. But to make this clear, we're not actually covering the Ratchet and Clank series here as a whole. We're just covering the very first game, specifically the PS3 version, if anybody's curious. And I make that point very clearly and very distinctly because, let's be honest with ourselves, the PS3 game's pretty different. Or the PS3 game. The first game's pretty different from the other games. It is, in fact, probably one of the better examples of Mega Man 1 syndrome I've seen. For those of you not aware, Mega Man 1 syndrome refers to when their first game in a work is pretty different from every other game in the work. Like, if you were to look at... That's a bad example. I was going to use Zelda 1 as an example. Zelda 1 isn't a terrible example, but Zelda 1 is not really the typical Zelda format, what we now refer to as the Zelda format. That actually got started in LTTP on the SNES, and most Zeldas after that follow the overall style and pattern of a Zelda game in that style therewith. Mega Man, of course, is a great example because Mega Man 1, in many different ways, is very fundamentally different than Mega Man 2 through 10, all of which are much, much more similar to each other in terms of their overall scope and framework. I mean, actually, it's points and score back in Mega Man 1, just named one thing right off the top of my head. But that also applies to things like setting and tone. For example, I hate to just jump on this right off the bat, but I absolutely hated Ratchet in this game. I wanted to smack him in his face in almost every scene he was in. He was a smarmy, self-interested asshole who wouldn't even try to stop someone who was blowing up planets because he doesn't have any invested interest in it. And then, of course, I'm willing to go after them just to get my revenge. Revenge is more important to me than anything. And then he finally gets invested in stopping the bad guy because the bad guy threatens his home. Now he actually has some investment in it. He's a jerk, is what I'm trying to say. And he's really mean to Clank in many cases. There's a lot of artificial drama between both Ratchet and Clank, ironically. And I just kind of tilt my head at it, because everything else I've seen of both Ratchet and Clank is much more... there's a great deal of chemistry there, there's more of a back-and-forth dynamic, there's definitely more banter, I should say there's definitely still banter, but it's much more lighthearted, it's much more friends who are poking fun at each other, like Pax and I do all the time, for example, or Gary and I do, as opposed to actually trying to put down the other person constantly. Although that does fit with the overall tone of the work, which I'm kind of building up to. They do a lot of little things in this game that are pretty good. Even here in the first game, obviously, I want to gush about the PS4 game, the recent one, because the PS4 game basically did all of the things I'm about to say that are good, better. It's an amazing game. I recommend it. I'm really, really looking forward to playing it some year. When I win the lottery, and then Operation Bellhammer commences, I will finally have the ability to get a PS4 and play the game. But one of the things they do right, well, actually I should say three things they do right. They really help flesh out the feeling of exploration in this game. And adventure. It feels like an adventure. It feels like, yeah, let's go and explore planets and see alien life forms and what's behind that corner, and here's some more bolts. By the way, the sound of the bolt pickup noise, I'm going to be dreaming about that sound for the next month. I swear to God, it's such an omnipresent. But the sound design of little background noises and the honking of the cars, or the weird sound of the wind, or maybe there's some animals in the distance, lots of ambient noise, lots of sweeping vistas. You can't actually go to most of the, well, I shouldn't say most, some of the areas you see, but there's big open spaces. It is basically the exact opposite of N64 Syndrome. For those who have not heard me talk about that, because this is the first time you've watched me for some reason, N64 Syndrome is very claustrophobic. It's actually something that bothers me personally. I don't really have claustrophobia in the literal sense of the word, but I do lean that direction. So when I have a game that's like this, with very tight corridors and very, like Quest 64, or is actually a fantastic example of this, or the original Turok, if you ever played that. Everything's just very small and very contained, and then there's these, there's the fog of war, which is 20 feet in front of you, so you have no idea where you're going. And it's funny because, when you're in an actual claustrophobic situation, like, say, Alien Isolation, that didn't bother me at all, because you're actually going through a duct. What I mean by the N64 syndrome is when the game limitations of the hardware and whatever and the programming are such that the game only shows you a tiny sliver of what you should actually see, and you notice it, and it just kind of makes you feel condensed. It's one of my biggest complaints with Morrowind, to give an example of what I'm talking about. So this game, I explain all this to explain what this game does not do. This game does not have that problem at all. Lots of big, open, sweeping vistas, which make it feel much more open, much more explorative, much more adventurous, much more, I can go over there and do this, and it's great, and that's awesome. There's another thing that I was very much reminded of going through this, and that's Firefly. Now, I'm about to be burned alive by every fan I have, but at least everyone who hasn't heard me say this, but I don't like Firefly that much. I'm not super against it. It's not like I hate Firefly or anything like that, but I've never been a fan of the Firefly series. The movie was pretty good, and I'm not going to go into the whys and the wherefores, but one thing Firefly did very, very well is something I actually talked about recently, with regards to Alien Isolation, actually. They do a very unique form of the familiarity effect. They utilize science fiction and high concepts as the mundane, but they do that on purpose. They do that to make it seem everyday, and thus the connecting point, the familiar point for us, the viewers, gamers, players, whatever, is that mundane, everyday nature of it. And Star Wars is another thing that does this fairly well. Aliens, of course, does this well. There's a few franchises that do this same concept in different executions. It feels like a place where hopping between planets is commonplace to the point of, it would be like me going to the grocery store is the equivalent of them going from planet to planet. And there's just tons and tons of super high technology, but it's all normal. It's all the ordinary stuff that everyone has and everyone does. You know what I mean? I like that. I like that feeling of it. That believable feeling of it, which is funny because of how incredibly unbelievable this setting actually is. But I'm still building up to that. So my friend Pax has a term for these games, and I've heard it referenced before. I don't know if this is the official genre, but it's called a collectathon, okay? This is a collectathon game. Now, this is probably, ironically, both the least collectathon and the best collectathon I've ever played. If you don't know what a collectathon is, Spyro and Banjo-Kazooie are probably the two best examples I could think of a collectathon. Yooka-Laylee is a game that's coming out soonish and will hopefully be good. Which is kind of a return to the collectathon genre. And of course, the recent Ratchet and Clank was kind of a collectathon. But the interesting thing is, The developers, when they made this game, deliberately were trying not to make a collectathon game. I mean, it's still got the framework there, but they wanted to kind of emphasize that this was a little bit less of the puzzle platforming than the previous games, and a little bit more whatever else they could make to stick. If you've seen every game after this one, the focus has just been more and more and more tight on things like combat, for example, and the boss battles, rather than the collectathon format. To the point where you could actually call, again, the recent one, the one that came out this year, a little bit more of a God of War style game, as opposed to a collectathon style game. Excuse me. And of course, for those of you not aware, God of War is actually basically an action RPG Zelda game. So we've got iterations upon iterations. Not that I'm complaining. One of the things I want to ask about this setting is if the blargs are intended to be allegory. Now, that may sound like a weird question to ask, because you could obviously look at them and say, well, of course this is allegory. This is incredible allegory. These people are stupid and waste money and destroy other people's planets for the sake of themselves. I mean, duh! Insert whoever it is you want them to be representing it. It's all good. But I mention this because I don't think they were intended to be allegory. And I'm going to finally discuss the reason why. And I've been building up to this point for a bit now. This is a Looney Tunes game. No, seriously, think about it for a moment. You ever watch the old Looney Tunes game? I'm talking about the old Looney Tunes. You know, the stuff I watched when I was a kid. Stuff that was coming out before I was born. The old Daffy Ducks, most specifically Duck Dodgers of the 24th century, was one of the things I was reminded of over and over and over and over and over. The overall approach to the whole thing feels like this. This is a universe that doesn't quite make sense when you really sit down and analyze it, and yet makes enough sense that you're willing to go with it. And it's got a lot of silly, quirky humor, and it's got a lot of ridiculousness. It's got things like hang on, what's it called? The Morpo way, turns people into chickens, or the suck cannon. You know, these are things that are things within this setting. You're playing in a cartoon, a classic Looney Tunes style cartoon, and everything that means. You know, you are wandering around as the Roadrunner, while the enemies, which are the Wile E. Coyote, are trying to come after you. You get where I'm going with this, right? But I'm not saying that as if it's a bad thing. I mean, quite the contrary, actually. I think that's part of the appeal of it. I do mention that with a bit of an asterisk, though, because in the future, they tend to shift a little bit more away from that, a little bit more towards the science fiction, a little bit more towards the Firefly, a little bit more towards the believable science fiction setting with some quirks. Which brings me to my next point. This game, in specific, again, the one I'm talking about today, is very much the Looney Tunes of the game, in a good way. But if I was to look at the series as a whole, I just wanted to make this one commentary here, because I could not avoid this thought. This game was Borderlands before there was Borderlands. No, seriously, think about it. There's a lot of minor characters that have a decent amount of characterization to separate them from each other, but no real character growth. Character growth isn't a big feature of either Borderlands or the Ratchet and Clank series. And I know people are going to argue Captain Quark. Just don't. And there's the quirkiness, there's the high science fiction, there's the ridiculous scope. Seriously, both Borderlands and Ratchet and Clank have multiple galaxies settled. They have a corporation that basically runs an entire galaxy, Megacorp, to use one example of this. This is a setting in which blowing up planets is something that is basically just a casual news report. You know, and I could keep going, but there's a lot of things that are similar between the two. I actually find myself genuinely wondering if the creators of Borderlands, when they were first sitting down to make it, were in any way inspired by the old Ratchet and Clank. But that Borderlands thing and the Looney Tunes thing both tie into why I think the Blarg and anything in general, this is not intended to be allegory. It's intended to be silly and ridiculous. The villain is quite literally a Captain Planet villain, you know? Captain Planet villains are not designed to make sense. They are not designed to be witting, biting, satirical aspects of human culture. They're designed to be guys who go, and then get defeated because they're stupid. And that's pretty much where Chairman Drek is. No offense whatsoever to the voice actor. I wrote his name down. Where was it? Kevin Michael Richardson. Great job of Drek. The voice acting overall was hit or miss for me, which makes sense for an older PC game, video game in general. But the voice acting that was good was really good. The voice acting that was not was kind of and it was also really, it's so strange hearing the different Ratchet, but I digress. Um, so, I mentioned the Looney Tunes thing. I want to talk about that later. I like the motivation of why our hero gets started. The motivation of space travel is simultaneously something that's grandiose and amazing and adventurous, and yet so simple and easy to understand. How many of you out there were really excited when you first got your first car? Hands up. I'll raise my hand because I was right in that same boat with you. I remember distinctly, this one time, I'm not going to name the city. This is years and years and years ago. This was like mid 90s. I guess that would have been 94. I don't know, 94, 95, something like that. I'm in this city, and I had my car, my first car. It was a Ford Taurus. Ugh. And I remember thinking it would be great if I could go to the nearby Barnes and Noble and I was going to look up a couple of books for something for school. And then it just sort of slowly dawned on me that I could, because that's like an hour and a half walk there and then back, and that's what I used to do. I used to just live with the time consumption and being bored out of my skull as I'm walking to get there. But I have a car, I can go there, and I did it. Just yeah, woo! And then I come back and I'm like, hey Mom, I went to Barnes and Noble. Oh yeah, she totally got it. Of course, Mom totally got it. That feeling of freedom is really what I'm trying to drive home. When you have access to a car, it carries with it many problems, but when you have that tool in your disposal, there's so much more you can do than you otherwise couldn't. And that's exactly what I feel the motivation was, and it's why I was right alongside with Ratchet right until he started being a dick later. Right at the beginning, I'm building a spaceship. It's this piece of crap, but I built it myself, and I can't wait to go and just go anywhere. I don't even care where I'm going. I just want to go and have adventures. Let's go. I gotta be honest, if I was existing in a setting like this, like Star Wars, or like, I suddenly can't think of the name of it, not Privateer, the other one. Oh my gosh, I can't think of it. I'm gonna get 50 comments. This always happens. My phone sits right next to me as I'm in bed, and it goes off. I leave it on just in case someone calls me if there's an emergency. So it goes off with this little ding, every time I get a comment on a video. And every time a video goes live, if I have something where I forget a name, the first like 5 dings are people just saying, it's this. It's this. Space Bust is the game. I really can't think of it. That's going to bother me. Whatever, go ahead and leave your 50 comments. I'll just endure them. You'll all wake me up with your comments about how it was blah game. But if I was in that kind of a setting, I absolutely would be right alongside with Ratchet. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do things. Yes, absolutely. Go! Woo! I do have a question here about Ratchet while we're talking about him. I already mentioned how I hate his guts. I'm not sure it would have worked, but when I first fired up this game, I started tilting my head because, I've seen Ratchet and Clank before, and I've played Ratchet and Clank before, but for just a bit, I thought this might actually have been a non-voice acted game, the original game, obviously. Because there was no voice acting for several minutes of cutscenes and explanation and whatnot, until finally Clank is like, excuse me, But I do find myself, the reason I bring this up is, I wonder if it would have been better if Ratchet had no voice actor. In this game, the gentleman does him later, James Taylor Arnold or something like that, does a much better job. But the original voice actor is terrible. I'm just going to say that's an exaggeration. He's not good. I have heard much worse, of course. But I do find myself wondering if it would have been an interesting take on the character if someone was just like, every time something comes up, we need to go to this planet to go with this. Just purely expressive responses, never actually says anything, and like turn it into an inside joke. Because this is basically a Looney Tunes thing anyways, right? You know how Wile E. Coyote always talked, right? He had the signs, So something in a similar venue of that, we need to go after Blur, and Quark has betrayed us. Just something like that. I don't know, just a food for thought. Of course, I prefer voice acting for the later games, especially the most recent PS4 one. I mentioned the Borderlands thing. The next thing, basically the last thing I want to talk about story-wise, because I don't have much to talk about story-wise, really, is the bolts. This setting is fascinating to me, and I don't think they did this on purpose. And near as I can tell from what little I know, they didn't really continue forward with this idea in the future. But this is a setting that fascinates me as an economist, economical-minded person, an economist. Um, because this is a setting in which bolts are currency. Now, I always like currencies and economies that are built around useful things. Probably my favorite example of this of all time is Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, where energy is a currency. Because that makes perfect sense. Energy is something you can store, thereby giving you, it's currency, the literal currency. You can hold on to a battery, which has blah, units of energy in it, thereby giving you a form of literal currency right there. But furthermore, it is a perfect modus operandi of trade because it is useful. Other people need it, you need it. Basically, everyone requires energy, and it is, while not a completely finite resource, it's also not completely infinite. There is a throughput of energy that limits how much you can have at any given point in time. So it was like the perfect economic system. I loved the idea. I've used something similar in some of my own settings, inspired by Alpha Centauri, and I've seen something similar in other settings. Another good example of this is actually System Shock 2. I know, weird example, but think about it for a moment. System Shock 2 is a setting in which the little nano probe things are actually currency, because they can actually be used by the pseudo-replicators they have in the setting in order to create stuff. When you hack one of those replicator terminals, you still have to put stuff into it, because it still needs those in order to make whatever it is you're making, right? It still needs the base components. You're lowering the price because what happens is they take a chunk of those nanites or whatever as skim, as their profit, and then the rest is used in order to actually make the item you want. So here we have a very similar concept. These bolts, which are used for basically everything, and that brings me to my second big point: robots. This is a robot inundated setting, and I like that about it. Robots are so prevalent and so commonplace that I have actually had trouble thinking of another setting, real life or fictional, in history, that equates to this. The thing that really drove it home for me, and I know this is dropped in the recent remake, is the fact that he makes this ship, and he can't even figure out what's wrong with it, and that's because he needs a robot to make it start. Everything uses robots. How do they transmit information in this game? How do they get around and have conveyor belts and repair and combat and even their guns in some cases are literally robots, like the I wrote down the name of all the guns. The Glove of Doom, which was a good one, the decoy glove, the drone device. There are so many ways in which robots are the commonplace thing. It's hard for me to even think of another commonplace thing that is so prevalent to the extent that robots are in this setting. So A, it makes perfect sense that bolts would be the currency, because they can be used for all the robots, which is used for everything. It's practically Omnigel, except more so. But then B, that informs so much of the, for lack of a better term, culture and society of these people. Robots are so commonplace, so normal, so everyday, that I would probably have a robot lamp, and I would have a robot dog, and I would have a robot car. Or a car that needs to be started by a robot, And that's part of that Looney Tunes thing, because, again, when you really sit down and analyze it, that doesn't quite work out, for reasons I don't really feel like going into. I'm not even talking from a realism perspective, just a believability perspective. But it's still fascinating to me, so much so that I've actually been debating. I actually already have a setting, a story set within the Imperium. It's one little sector over here, and the story itself is called the Empire of One. Excuse me, the Empire of One, or the One Man Empire. I kind of change what I call it from time to time. It's the idea of there's only one living being within a mass of machinery and robots, and I'm tempted to make a few changes to that and alter and maybe write a few more stories because of this game and its influence therein. And I found that fascinating. I also want to mention that one thing I found interesting about this game, it's no wonder that Captain Jack Quark, went on to become so much more of a character in every game after this one. He's literally the narrator in the recent game, because in many ways I feel he steals the show. While Drek is certainly a fairly competent and well-done Captain Planet villain, both Ratchet and Clank feel like secondary characters in their own game in this one, with Captain Quark being much, much more interesting. He doesn't have, well, I'd say he has about the same focus as Ratchet and Clank, but he is much more interesting, and what he does on screen is usually more fleshed out than artificial drama, complaining about things, or snarking at each other. Quark does a whole gamut of things and shows a lot of aspects of his particular variety of stupidity, and of course his backbiting, betraying nature, and blah 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 blah. And I like that. I also do have to admit I like Drek's motivation, because at first it seems like Drek is just a well-intentioned extremist. I will do whatever it takes to save my people. No, he's the reason his people were screwed in the first place. He just wants money. Insert your own joke here. They're all good. My mind was going to CBS. You can insert EA there if you want. I mean, pick your pick. They're all good. Apparently, all those executives in real life are all Blargians. But I want to talk about the gameplay last. I don't have as much to say about the gameplay as I'd like. This feels like Gadgets the game. This kind of ties into that robot feel. The pseudo high-tech while at the same time being low-tech setting. Like, for example, the Protoss over in StarCraft are way more advanced than just about anything we see in this setting. And they feel more of a high-tech, high-advanced kind of a society. But there is so much of a variety of what can be done with these various technologies in this game. And again, it kind of follows the Looney Tunes logic of not really conforming to literal logic. So we have things, like, well, I'll talk about that one last. But we have things like the bomb glove, which is bombs, and the Pyriter and the Helipack, yes, I'm just reading down the list here. The Blaster, which is one of my personal favorite guns, by the way. The Glove of Doom, that was awesome. Here, go kill things. That's probably one of the ones where I just had fun with it. The Taunter, the Suck Cannon was great. The Devastator was enjoyable, of course. Tesla Claw was so much fun. The Morpo Ray was just silly. The Rhino, RYNO, which stands for Rip Ya a New One. I love that. And it reminds me of actually a very specific gun, I forget the name of it, that I actually had in Just Cause 3, which is basically an AoE rocket launcher. And that's pretty much what it is, and it's pretty much awesome. What else did I have? The Walloper, that was great. The Visibomb, that was actually really cool. I had some serious flashbacks to Metal Gear Solid 1 with, steering the actual missile in and whatnot. It was a really cool and fun weapon. So many of these weapons, too. This is the interesting thing to me. I say it's Gadgets the game, and you get other types of gadgets too. The sling thing, which I can't remember what it's called right now. The woo thing, the aforementioned helipack and thruster pack. It feels like a game an orc would make, not an orc, an orc. Because it's all about just adding more and more gadgets to your arsenal. And you don't really need any of them. I mean, there are people who can beat this game with, I want to say 3 weapons. I looked it up at one point, because the challenge run of this game sounded like fun. Which is basically the equivalent of a swordless run, aka use it with as minimum amount of weapons as you can. And there's like 3 which you absolutely require to go through the game. But you can basically Omni-Wrench your way through it. And the Omni-Wrench itself, which I'll talk about last, is pretty strong and pretty useful. And that's not really that surprising. It is basically the Mega Man Lemon Pellet. It is the Power Blaster from Samus in Metroid. It's the default weapon, and the default weapon has to be, from a gameplay design perspective, useful, because it's incredibly easy and much, much easier than you'd think to end yourself in a situation where you basically don't have access to your other weapons. You run out of ammo or energy or whatever. So the Omni-Wrench, you could just wail through so much of this game. So I found myself with a Mega Man X1 perspective. If you don't know what I mean by that, while there were some very useful weapons in Mega Man X1, most of them, in my opinion at least, were just there for fun. I didn't run through stages blowing all my weapons and tossing the shields around and the cutters and homing missiles and all that because I needed it. I could do way better, way quicker with just my blaster. I've proven that. I've speedrun this game. And I've done it without weapons. But those weapons are fun! And that brings me to my big point. This game is fun. It's just fun, the game. Everything about the gameplay, the platforming sections, the quick respawn at nearby checkpoints. I never had a frustration moment in this whole game. The silly, cartoony, Looney Tunes style of the thing, the occasional cutscenes which are fed to you from the mouths of robots, for God's sakes, the attempts at banter and the successful banter, the presentation of Quark, so many of the boss fights. This is fun the game. And I think that I am admittedly probably a little bit influenced by the recent game, because like I said, the recent game is everything this game did, but better, in my opinion. And that is definitely like the pinnacle of just fun the game. A friend of mine, I haven't played all of it, a friend of mine popped me in, I don't know at which world, one of the big rocky worlds, and he already had access to the jetpack. He's like, here, just have fun with it. Yeah, woo! And it was just fun to go around and zip around in it. And I find that interesting because I feel that's the overall approach of the game as a whole. And this brings me back to the Omni-Wrench. What is the Omni-Wrench? The Omni-Wrench's entire purpose is to be a multi-purpose tool. It's there to do whatever it needs to do, you know, magneting in bolts or changing the gear things or whacking the hell out of enemies. And there's a few more uses that are used for it in the future. It is there because you're not really supposed to think about it. You're not really supposed to ruminate on it. You're supposed to sit back and have fun with it. And the best part is, when I sat back and thought about it, I still had fun with it. It wasn't stupid fun. It was actually smart fun, well-designed fun, polished fun, even. And I love that about this game. I am even more enthused about playing the PS4 version now, which I already wanted to play after having played this one. I can't wait to see what they really do with the whole gamut of everything. I mean, the hoverboard races alone have got to be awesome. And, you know, the grind down rails sections. I mean, God, there's got to be so much more in the new version that I'm looking forward to. And I guess that's my final thought. So I hope you've enjoyed this rumination, especially you, Omni. And if you're even watching this, and I will see you guys next time.